All right, so to get this thing started on India, compared to last session on China, how many of you feel more confident about India? Okay, how many of you feel much more confused about India? Okay, that's all right. Like we said last time, some of these different topics just resonate differently with different people. And some people will be looking at this like, oh, this is the easiest stuff in the world. I'm so glad we're not doing China today. And the people are like, God, I miss China. It makes so much sense. So don't let that bother you. Next question. Of the things that you circled on the back that didn't make sense, how many of you had 10 or fewer circles ballpark? Don't worry about counting them up quick, but just, there wasn't much that you circled that needed clarification. Okay, how many of you were circling like crazy? And that's okay if you were. That's what we need to know. Okay. All right, so where do we have the greatest need to start then? Give me a topic. Government. Is that a general agreement? Okay. Where else do we have a significant need? Emily? Economy? Other people? Economy? Okay. Alia? Foreign contacts. Okay. All right, we'll start with those three then, and we'll see where we get through. All right, so today, why don't we do this? Why don't we start at the foundations era and go all the way through on a particular topic? That's a little bit different again from what we did last time with China. And so some of this is me trying to get used to you and you trying to get used to me and us trying to figure out what works well. Okay, so with India in the foundations era, in terms of governments, what do we know about India? Ever? Okay, starts off regionally, and then we have some form of centralization. What's that? All right. Yeah, that's better. Okay, what are our two moments of centralization in India? You can just say it. Mauryan and Gupta. Which one's bigger? Okay, stop and think for a second. Which one's bigger? Mauryan? Question mark at the end or period? Okay, Mauryan's bigger. Which one is better governed? Gupta. Why? Very good. Smaller territory, easier to rule, and better use of alliances and an early form of a bureaucratic system. What holds the Mauryan Empire together? The two leaders. First one being Chandragupta, and the second one, Ashoka. So the Mauryan Empire is bigger. It's got more fireworks. It's got more panache. Gupta Empire, a little bit smaller, but a little bit more stable. But for most of India's history, especially in the foundations era, what form of government dominates? Regionalism. Now, what happens to government at the end of the foundations era? Right, it falls, just like all the other classical civilizations. Yeah. Regionalism, sure. All right, so take the United States. If we got rid of a federal government, what would we be left with? 50 states, right? And each state would be able to have its own laws, have its own currency, have its own my brain's not working this morning. Sure. Its own flag, its own speed limits on highways. They can make all their own decisions. There would be nothing that would unify any movement from state to state. So if you were driving from Virginia to Maryland, as soon as you crossed that border, life could radically change in terms of the expectations that you have and the rules that you're held accountable to. That's what we're seeing in India for large chunks of its history. They don't have a single unified system, single unified government or laws or currency or trading practices or any of that. As you move from region to region, the rules change. Now, the upside is that allows each region to hopefully do a good job of taking care of the people in that region. But the downside is it makes it very, very difficult for everybody to work together. So, for example, as we head into the post-classical age, who shows up? Right, the Muslims. And how does that work with Indian regionalism in terms of being able to effectively fight back? Right, it's harder, they can't. And again, that's the big downside of more regional forms of government. It may work on a day-to-day basis, but in a crisis, you've got 100 different people going 100 different directions. So what do we see happen in terms of forms of government as we transition to the post-classical age? Does it change or does it stay the same? It stays largely the same. Hi, Rachel.
Do you have a chair I could borrow?
Probably.
It's okay. You want to use that? No. Thank you.
Oh, you can't have that though.
Too.
No, don't take my wallet. People listening to this later are going to be really confused. Like, is he getting robbed? What's happening? I thought this was a safe school. Okay. So as we continue on into the post-classical age, we're going to see regionalism largely continue. Except, what change are we going to see in terms of who's in charge in some of these regional governments? Who just showed up? The Muslims. So who's going to be in charge in some of these kingdoms? The Muslims. Okay, good. It is early. I apologize. This is far too much thinking for any time before 9 o'clock. Now, as we get to the end of the post-classical age, we will once again see a change. And what will that change be in terms of government? Not quite yet for the British. Who shows up before the British? All right, even before the Portuguese. The Mongols, and the Mongols then later become a new form of government, a new empire, called the Mughals. Good. The Huns will come in during the classical age in the foundations period and will wreak havoc as Huns are wont to do. And then they'll go away / get integrated into India's caste system. All right, so we have the Mughals, and the Mughals will kind of bring this cycle back around to centralization. So just like we had before, regional, Mauryan. You guys are going to love having her. You want a what? Okay, so regional, Mauryan. Mauryans fall, regional, Gupta. Regional, end of all classical civilizations, Huns, Regional, Mughals. Mughals, what is that? I'm struggling today. Mughals have an even larger empire than the Mauryans did. This is the largest centralized empire that India has up to this point. They unite almost all of the Indian subcontinent. Anybody remember who the guy is that starts it? Akbar? He is on the list. Is it Akbar? I could be wrong. I have not yet learned all of history, but I feel like it's not Akbar. Isn't it Babar? That's what I thought too. Yeah. Okay, so we got a guy named Babar. He's the one that's going to begin the unification of Italy under this... Italy? Wow! India! I apologize. Unification of India under this new Mughal government. Now, interesting side note, which requires us to head down to cultural influences and religions. What is the difficulty that India has politically with regard to religions? It's divided. All right, so all through here, early on, life is good because it's easy. All you have is Hinduism. But then you got this goofy Hindu prince, Siddhartha, that decides to go rock the boat and start a new religion called Buddhism. So now we have conflict. And then, we already said this, but who shows up in the post-classical age? The Muslims. And so by the time of the Mughals, India has at least 3 different options for religions. What remains the most popular? Hinduism, good. But the second most popular has quickly become Islam. And so just pause for a moment and think about the huge, huge difference between those two faiths. You have a very strict monotheistic faith, a singular God, a singular set of rules and practices, and then you have Hinduism, which some still qualify as monotheistic, Brahman, who can then be compartmentalized into different avatars, or some people just look at it as a polytheistic religion with 1,000 different varieties of God. A variety of ways to practice and worship and different holidays and statues and all that fun stuff. How do those two fundamentally different schools of religion coexist in the same place? You guys are shaking your heads like, not well? No, not well. You kind of have to agree to disagree and move on / fight sometimes. Politically, then, this makes it very, very difficult for the Mughals to unify and then to expand, because what can you not use as a unifying political force? Religion. Another fun side note, who tries to do it? Akbar with the Dini Ilahi, which is fun for everyone, the whole family. I'm probably going to spell it wrong given the way that I'm going today, but it's close. I'll pull a Mr. Ewald and just kind of trail off at the end, and you'll be like, what does that say? It says Dini Ilahi. How well does that work? Not well? Yeah, Alia? It was kind of a fusion of aspects of both Hinduism and Islam. It was an attempt to appease both sides and then offer something new for both groups. And I'm sorry I'm being so vague, but I honestly don't know all the particulars of it.
We tried to get rid of certain aspects of each that were culturally submissive, like the sati and stuff like that. Tried to get rid of those, which is just not going to fly.
Right. I mean, bottom line for those that were hoping this could be your profession sometime after high school, creating a religion from scratch and trying to get people to follow it is typically very, very difficult. So just words of caution. All right, so we have the Mughals, and the Mughals become fairly successful at unifying India politically. Again, we never solved this pesky religious issue, and this is going to come back to bite them later. But for a time, we have some stability. And then, who shows up? And you already said this, we're just recapping now. The British, and prior to the British, the Portuguese. And so now we are going to see conflict between the existing Mughal government and these strange white people that come in first intent only on trading, but later with an eye towards conquest and colonization. So by the time we get over here to the modern era, we will have said goodbye to the Mughals and said hello to the British Raj, the rule of virtually all of India by the British, but primarily by the British East India Company. give you guys a lot of credit for not immediately jumping into a Pirates of the Caribbean series of conversations. Well done. Excellent self-control. All right, so this all lasts up until who or what? Gandhi. Good. Good job. That's the name you need to say. And you've already got his name, I think, on the back page under significant people. Good. All right, so Gandhi and the Indian National Congress are going to help turn India into what sort of political system? What's that? I'm getting old and my hearing's going. Good, a more parliamentary system, representative democracy, whatever you want to call it. Yes, ma'am. The Indian National Congress is the political party that is created in response to a great deal of frustration by the Indian people who are tired of the British telling them what to do and giving them very little direct control of their own country. So rather than wage a very unsuccessful war and try to fight them out militarily, Gandhi and, sometimes I can pull his name out, who's the other guy? Thank you, B.G. Tilak. They go the diplomatic route. They create a formal political party, and they use political methods as well as Gandhi's nonviolent protests to encourage the British to leave, rather than go through the direct conflict route, which they had actually tried back here, which is what led to the British Raj in the first place. You had the Sepoy Mutiny, or the Sepoy Rebellion. Do you guys remember that vaguely? Okay, I see head nodding. That's good. So they had found that they really just could not compete militarily or industrially with the British, so why bother fighting? This seemed a much smarter way to go. All right. How are we with government? Does that at least give you some frame of reference from start to finish? Okay. So why don't we finish up religion while we're here? What do we need to add to this list as we progress through the rest of the Christianity? Because the Europeans never leave home without it. All right. So what that will mean by the time we get to the present is that India will be even more religiously diverse. Hinduism will remain prominent and relatively dominant. You will still have a relatively large Buddhist population. You will still have an incredibly large Muslim population, and you will have a growing Christian presence all the way up until today, which is still expanding.
If there were already created religions in India, why did Christianity need to be
Trying to come up with a 30-second version to that question. All right, so the question is, if there were already so many other religions, why does Christianity take hold? The reason why Islam became so popular and Buddhism is because it allowed people to move away from the caste system. Christianity allows that as well. And India has always done a great job of making other people that come in bend to their will and their practices. So the Aryans come in and kind of mold themselves into the existing culture with a few tweaks. The Huns come in, they kind of mold themselves in. The Kushans, they come in and fit themselves into the hierarchy. Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity allow people an escape from the caste system. Who is this particularly attractive to? Good, the lower class people and even the untouchables. People whose lives would, under the Hindu system, suck for millennia until they had worked their way up. Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism offered them an immediate escape from that sort of life and promised them at least spiritual equality and some form of salvation that Hinduism just couldn't offer until they had worked their way up through the different jati. Christianity in particular shows up at a time when the Hindus and the Muslims have already been engaged in conflict with each other. One of the things to talk about, I don't even know where we should put it. Where should we put Pakistan? You already have it. Okay, cultural influences. We'll leave it there then. One of the things the British do on their way out is they recognize this significant fight between Muslims and Hindus in India. And the British, as a parting gesture, say, we're going to solve your problem for you. What we're going to do is we're going to separate your country into two. We're going to give you Pakistan and we're going to give you India. And the Hindus are going to live in India and the Muslims are all going to go to Pakistan. And any Hindus living in Pakistan need to pack up and leave. And any Muslims living in India need to pack up and leave. And you need to go this way and swap. Guess how well that works? No. You can't hear it, but I'm shaking my head right now. It doesn't work. And so again, Christianity then will serve as a viable third option to what has become a relatively hostile environment between Hindus and Muslims. But also, and you see this especially in this country, religion is a very, very personal thing. And you can't always just explain it away with historical reasoning. For some people, a particular religion just speaks to them in a way that others don't. It gives them a feeling of security, of peace, of fulfillment, of promise in a future that whatever system they grew up in didn't. And so that's why you see people of all different faiths sometimes choosing a totally different one just because it seems to make more sense. So there really isn't any great cultural or historical answer we can give because sometimes it's just about people. Okay, any other questions about government or religion? Emily? Good question. Does the caste system ever get abolished? Legally, yes. In practice, no. And one of the things I gave to my class, I don't know if I passed it along to you. Sometimes I'm not good at sharing. There was an article that National Geographic did, I think in 2004, 2005, where they went and they interviewed untouchables in India. And a lot of them live in kind of the northern area of India. And they are still persecuted and attacked and beaten and raped and have their homes burned down and their property stolen. And nothing usually happens to the people that do that. Because in many parts of India, the caste system is still valid. And it is still acceptable to look down on other people because of the class they were born into. And if those people try to rise out of their caste, and the way the article tells it, there is this untouchable who is trying to buy property and build himself a nice house and dig his own well and, kind of become middle class. And the people around him from a higher caste are like, you can't do that, you're an untouchable. And they beat him up, and I apologize for being graphic, but they rape his wife and set fire to some of his stuff, and nothing happens. He's not arrested, there's no punishment, because even some of the local systems of government still abide by the caste system. So no, despite it now being legally removed, in practice it's still alive and well in some parts of India. Now there are other places where you'd walk down the streets and you'd never know there had ever been a caste system. And people wouldn't be talking about which caste they belong to because they don't think of themselves in that context. But there are certain, and India is a big country, which is why it's still possible to have this kind of diversity. Is it in the 60s? I want to say it was like 64. Okay.
It was a while ago, but like you said, it was...
Okay. Yeah, so we'll go with 1964 until somebody proves us wrong, which, by the way, if you're about to tune out and you're kind of tired, feel free to take out your phone and Google it. And then you can correct us, and we'll give you a little shout-out on the video. It'll be fun. Check that off your bucket list. Okay, we also need to talk about economics, I believe, right? Yes? Maybe? Getting a lot of blank stares. Okay, we'll do economics. What's happening in India in the Foundations era economically? They are trading. All right, one of the cool things that we have in India is we have these 3 zones of trade, and I don't even know if this is on the back side of your sheet, so you may want to add this in. But we have these 3 distinct geographic areas of India. You have the coastal regions, which rely primarily on fishing and maritime trade. You have kind of the plains areas of India, which rely on agriculture. And then you have, more of the hilly, mountainous regions that rely on animal husbandry. No, that doesn't mean marrying your animals, by the way. Animal domestication, herding, raising livestock. And so you will see some trade between those regions to acquire goods that they don't have, either different food types or different tools or things like that. You will also see, because of their geographic location, the northwest portion of India, despite the fact that a large portion of India's northern border is very well defended by the Himalayas. In the northwest portion of India, there is a pass out of the mountains that allows you to connect with what today we would call the Middle East. At the time, it allowed them to connect with Mesopotamia. And so during the latter portion of the Foundations era, into the classical period, you are going to see some trade out of India with Mesopotamia, with Persia. Then some pesky Greek guy is going to show up and open up trade there. Who's that guy? Alexander the Great. So you will see India connected to a larger network of trading partners than, say, someplace like China that we talked about last time. Yeah.
If there was different areas of India and different zones and stuff, did they all consider themselves as one country?
No, and that's where we get back to that regionalism thing. They will not identify as a united group of people that just happen to live in different zip codes. They will, much like in Western Europe, identify themselves as being members of different kingdoms. So like you saw in Western Europe with the Franks and the Gauls and the Goths and the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and other kinds of Goths. They won't even identify with any sort of common unifying cultural heritage. It's like, we're awesome and you all suck, despite the fact that we live in more or less the same region. That is a great question. Yeah, we'll go with that. We'll give the British credit for doing that. Because that would probably make the most sense, right? Because you would have the transition out of the Mughal Empire into a politically unified India. But again, I have zero confidence in my response. So if you guys want to look it up, go for it. Yep. Good job, Alia. Stump the teacher. All right, so as we head into the post-classical age, who becomes a very important trading partner? Muslims, good. See how they keep showing up. You're also going to see an expansion of Indian Ocean trade. Now, we spend more time talking about this here when the Europeans show up. But as technology improves, maritime trade, oceanic trade is going to become far, far more important than land-based trade for very obvious logical reasons, which are you can get to more places faster, and ship versus horse, what's the advantage? You can take a lot more. Now, in terms of products, what does India have to offer, especially as we get to here and beyond? Cotton and spices. What's that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, and then for fun, over here we get to add in, right, opium. Now, interesting thing economically, especially once the European presence becomes more dominant. Remember, at first, when Vasco da Gama shows up in 1498, he doesn't have a lot to offer. He kind of gets laughed at. He throws a little temper tantrum, kills some people, turns into a pirate for a while, sinks a boat full of missionaries. It's not good. It's not good. Actually, it was pilgrims, not missionaries. I apologize. But at that point in time, the Europeans didn't really have much to offer, and India's economy was so much stronger and so much more diverse. But by the time that we get to the British Raj, the British will now decide what India will produce. And the British are primarily interested in two things: cotton and opium. Cotton because they can grow it in India, take it back to England, and manufacture it now that they have factories. And opium because they want to do what with it? Trade with China. So these will remain important through here. But the problem with the combination of these three is that they are all cash crops. And what's the problem with a cash crop? I mean, the upside is it makes you lots of money, but what's the downside? You can't eat it. I mean, I suppose you could put it in your mouth and chew, but I would not recommend trying to survive on cotton. That's not going to go well for you. And so one of the things that you see happen as a result of the European control of India's economy is you see famine. Because the British don't live there. They're there for the money. And so if they can turn more land into cash crop producing farmland, they're going to do it. And if that means that they get rid of wheat production in some areas, or barley, or whatever they're using, corn once that shows up, they're going to, because they're in it for the economic profit. Now, 20th and 21st century India, what do we know about them economically, despite the fact that we haven't really covered it in the textbook yet? What do you know just from existing in the 21st century world? Outsourcing. India has become a very, very involved member of the service economy. Telecommunications, internet. They do some amazing, amazing stuff because of the time difference and because of 21st century internet technology. Some of the tax companies like H&R Block can actually outsource your taxes. They can send them to an accountant in India who will work on them overnight and send them back to the US by the time the sun comes up here, and presto, your taxes are done. It's fantastic. You gotta love technology. So all of these tech-related industries and careers are becoming very, very important in India's economy. You also see a lot of manufacturing. So when you compare the present era Indian economy with the early modern and modern, it's kind of amazing to see how far it's come and how fast. All right, so that was politics, economics, and religion. What other areas do we need? The arts? I mean, we can. Do culture? Okay. We can do culture. All right, so important things to note. You have the Aryans as the early cultural influence into India. I mean, India on its own already has a relatively vibrant culture. They have, river valley civilizations just like China, just like Mesopotamia, so they get started with all of the basic building blocks of civilization. The Aryan invaders come in from Central Asia, and they bring in some new things. They bring in part of the idea of the caste system. Didn't they bring in Sanskrit? Yeah. So they're going to then help Indian civilization continue to evolve and become more sophisticated. Then the Arabs are going to show up, early post-classical age, around the 700s, 730s. And they're now going to bring in Arab culture, architecture, religion especially. And they in turn are going to be influenced by Indian culture. So your textbook talks about how these local Muslim princes are suddenly riding around on elephants like Indian Rajas. They're letting their hair grow long, and they're wearing the billowy, baggy clothes, and they're eating Indian food, and some are even claiming to be divinely descended from the gods, which is pretty much blasphemy in Islam, but as long as you're in India, it's apparently okay. And then culturally, we see the Europeans show up. And again, we see India continue this amazing ability to make people adapt to them. So the Europeans show up in India, they're still trying to build European-style houses, they're still trying to wear European stuffy clothes, and then they're like, man, it's hot here. So then they build more open houses like the bungalows. They start wearing looser pants because they're tired of sweating starting at 9 a.m. But they also bring in some of their culture, like Christianity. Any of you been to London? Cool. It's one of my favorite cities. You notice how many Indian restaurants there are there? They're all over the place. So it's yet another example of the Indians being able to not really totally assimilate, but at least allow foreigners and invaders to become part of their culture. British people almost seem to like Indian food better than they like their own food. All right, then we talked about British Raj. That's certainly a cultural influence as well. And then you're going to have a shift in culture with the partition of India into India and Pakistan, now creating a Muslim center and a Hindu center in what was the same country is certainly going to change the culture of that area as well. What else do you think we should cover?
I don't know, but it's 1950. India outlawed.
Oh, it is 1950? Okay, caste system outlawed in 1950.
They started to with some laws.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming. We'll see you next week. Have a good weekend.